Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoy this episode of the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs, examining the release of the probable cause affidavit in the Moscow murders case, recorded live with our patrons. If you enjoy reactions to breaking news and deep dives into complicated legal questions, we hope you'll give Legal Briefs a try. And if you'd like to join us for live recordings and get all your episodes early and ad-free, check out our Patreon page. For now, enjoy the show.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs, everyone. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my recuperated co-host, Brett. Hey, Brett.
Hello, Alice. Yes, I feel so much better than the last time we were here talking about the Moscow case.
Well, I'm so glad because that was just a few days ago.
I know.
And I had my doubts that you were going to feel better. Real quick, we are doing this show live like we did the last Moscow arrest update. And I want to thank Bubbles in the chat for giving me the recuperated descriptor for Brett because it's so apt. He's not drinking Gatorade anymore, guys. He's back to drinking something a little harder.
We're back. Yeah, exactly. So,
but I think we can see by the comments too. Recuperated also because, oh my goodness, we had a lot to read today when Mr. Brian Koberg arrived in Idaho, had his initial appearance, and as promised, the courts unsealed the probable cause affidavit, which we'll talk more about this, but pretty much a trial brief. It is not a probable cause affidavit. It is basically a reasonable doubt trial brief ready to go to trial. And we'll talk about why that is. But if you haven't read it yet, it's only 19 pages. It's very, very fulsome. It's very detailed. It's well written. I will say that because I think we've kind of slammed some other probable cause affidavits for not being well written. I say all that to say everything we're talking about tonight, never take our word for it. Go and read the main source because we will interpret it for you guys, but you should always go to the main source. So I'll drop a link here.
And let me say about that. The great thing about probable cause affidavit is it's a legal document, obviously, but it is not legalese. This is not like a brief. It's not like a court opinion, although those should be regularly understandable by ordinary people. But a probable cause affidavit, more than anything, is really written this is the facts. You don't have to be a lawyer to read this, and you shouldn't have to, because as Alice said, eventually this with more facts is going to be what you present to a jury of lay people, and they're going to have to decide whether somebody's guilty. So you really should be able to read this plain statement of the facts and come to a conclusion. That's one reason they're so great. We're going to talk about this, and it's great that you guys are here. You don't need us for this. This should be pretty self-explanatory.
And that's another great point. It's not legalese because even if a lawyer helped draft this, you'll notice that the affiant is a police officer, and it's supposed to be from their perspective. They have to be the ones to attest to it. That's why in this case, this officer is the affiant. And so it's written from the police officer's perspective. It's in the first person. This reads exactly like a police report. Probable cause affidavits can come in lots of forms, but the way this particular one is written is like a police report. And I say that because it's incredibly detailed. It doesn't jump to conclusions. It doesn't leave out gaps. You can have gaps in your probable cause reasoning, but this one doesn't. It's as if we are actually reading the returns of the search warrants, and almost like they are testifying as if in court, but on paper in this particular affidavit.
And I'll tell you what else is interesting about it. I mean, not interesting about it necessarily, but what I thought was interesting, it actually, oftentimes affidavits will have a lot of boilerplate language. This one just doesn't. Alice and I both, unfortunately, have had to read and review a lot of affidavits, some of them 100 pages long, and oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This one leaves out the 50 pages of boilerplate that you often see in affidavits like that. So it is really good. It is very thorough. It's more thorough. You know, most of you have probably read at least one probable cause affidavit before. We're going to talk about that one later on. It is much more thorough than that. And we'll talk about all that once we've sort of gone through the timeline and gone through what we learned from this. And boy, I mean, did we learn a lot? I mean, this is a lot. I mean, there's still a lot of mystery, and there's still a lot of questions that we obviously all have, but there's a lot here. So
let's do this. Okay. Just because I know a lot's on y'all's minds, things that we will touch upon after we go through the affidavit, things I want to talk about so I don't forget. I'd like to talk about what was necessary basically for probable cause and why this goes above and beyond it, and strategically why the police and the prosecutor in this case decided to go so far above and beyond probable cause standard. Number two, if they knew it was him, when did they know it was him? And why didn't they move in sooner? Why did they wait until 2 months after the murders? Because he's clearly a dangerous person and the evidence seems pretty good against him. Why didn't they move in sooner? Were they leaving the public at risk in doing that? And talking about his cross-country trip, whether there was jurisdictional working, you know, if the FBI told Indiana police to pull him over. What were they trying to do? Yeah, absolutely. They're not going to say they did it on their Twitter, by the way, but whether there was cross-jurisdictional work on that, and why, if you'll see the last piece of evidence, I mean, you begin to understand why the arrest happened when it did. Why did they do a trash pull in Pennsylvania and not a trash pull, say, in Washington or in Idaho before he left to go cross country? So those are some of my thoughts. And then what comes next? So those are kind of my own agenda items. But before we do that, I'd like to actually walk through the affidavit because you guys wanted to know what happened and you wanted to know the crime scene. Well, it is all here, and a lot of it is new information that we did not know before and corrects information that was misreported pretty widely. For example, the most obvious, we had thought that the two surviving roommates both had rooms on the first floor. And in our very first episode, we had thought, well, the way this house is built, if those two people are downstairs, there's no way they could have heard what was happening upstairs. And that turns out to be wrong. So anything you want to add to the agenda, Brett, before we go through the affidavit?
No, we'll hit it all, and the people in the chat will let us know if we miss anything. So, I mean, look, number one, you know it's going to be good because the officer's name is Brett. That's the first thing I noticed.
I knew you were going to say that.
But anyways, so, and this is the way these always go. It's an officer. The officer is relaying information onto him and other investigators. He is just sort of the person who stands in. Any of the investigators really mentioned, any of the other people who were there could have done this. Sometimes that's a strategic decision about who does the affidavit. For instance, this may be an officer who never testifies, who the state doesn't plan to call. The reason you do that is because this affidavit won't come in as evidence and can't really be used by anybody. But if Officer Payne testified, then it could be used on cross-examination if there's anything inconsistent. And given that it's still early days in the investigation, things may change, they may learn new things. You know, you don't want to open them up to that. So that may be one of the reasons they picked Brett Payne as opposed to, you know, Officer Smith or someone else who was there earlier on. One thing that is really interesting in this, and one thing that I think we're going to talk about a lot, is why were there two survivors? Who was he targeting? And, you know, was Xana targeted Or was this just a coincidence? There are things we learned that we did not know. For instance, I think we all thought that everybody was asleep by like 3:15 or so, like after those text messages to the boyfriend. We sort of thought that was when everybody went to sleep. That's not right. Xana apparently was more of a night out than I ever was. I mean, I often stayed up late, but I can't imagine going out and ordering food at 4:00 in the morning, which is apparently what she did. So this actually pushes the timeline back a little bit. She was awake, I think, kind of definitely when this guy walked in. When this guy entered the house, I think she was still awake. And I think, and this is speculation, you know, there's always been speculation about who the target was. I tend to think it was someone on that third floor. And I kind of think that had she not been awake, had she been asleep, I kind of think she would have survived and her boyfriend would have survived just like the other two did. And it seems like, sort of based on the timeline, that as this person is going up the stairs, he almost kind of runs into her. And that's when this sort of attack happens.
For those of you who haven't read it, we'll walk through the timeline really quickly here. 2 survivors, one person, one girl lives on the first floor, and that's where her bedroom is. I think she has more limited mention in this affidavit because she probably heard or saw very little, just like we speculated in our very first episode, because she's kind of on a different floor. The way it's built into the rock, she's not really seeing much. The second roommate, who is listed as DM, and that's pretty common. We've talked about this before. If they're not a victim and there's no reason to know their identity, because they know this affidavit is going to be unsealed, they'll protect their identity. There's no reason for DM to be out there. People are going to obsess over this case and they're going to look her up. So they're doing their best to protect her identity until trial, by the way. She will have to testify if this goes to trial. Hearsay is allowed in an affidavit, but it's not allowed at trial for a criminal conviction. So DM actually has a room right next to Xana. She's on the second floor. Sounds like her room is by actually the sliding glass door where the killer left and probably came in. So what we know is that at least DM was asleep around 4 a.m. And whether Xana had gone to sleep and woken up or was just up since she came back from the party, she got hungry and ordered DoorDash at 4:00 and it was delivered. And they spoke to the DoorDash person. Don't get hung up on details, guys. Clearly, the DoorDash person has been cleared here. You know, just know that helps us put a time in the timeline. We'll come back to that. There's no reason for us to focus on that now. More will come out about that at trial. But she gets DoorDash at 4:00. Now, the reason that's important is before we thought everything happened around 2:33. This pushes it all the way over to 4 a.m. What we do think happened was that the upstairs 2 roommates were asleep, and they were the only 2 up there. Now, the timeline as described in the affidavit is sometime around 4:12. This all happens kind of within the span of half an hour.
She's still on her TikTok at 4:12.
She's on her TikTok, and she, being Xana, is on her TikTok. And so we think she's the one who's awake at that time. DM wakes up. She's the only one who she's a witness to all of this. She wakes up and hears what she thinks is Goncalves upstairs playing with her dog. We'll talk about what this timeline means later. And then she hears who she thinks is Goncalves upstairs say, "Someone's here." But the police basically in this affidavit say because of the TikTok activity on Xana's phone, they think it was actually Xana who said it. Again, makes sense. Xana's a female voice, so it's easy to get confused. Her room is right next to DM's. Makes sense that if she said something, it could be heard on the same floor.
And look, we know that Kaylee was up pretty late. So it's possible it's her, but I think Alice is right. And I think hearing playing with the dog, I think she probably was hearing a lot of stuff involved with the murder and just was rationalizing in her mind, right? And we're going to talk a lot about this. I know this is something people have really focused on, but you know, that there's someone here. Don't think that came from TikTok. I could be wrong. You know, the affidavit's kind of like, well, maybe it came from TikTok. No, I think probably that was Xana saying that, probably to her boyfriend.
Right. And we'll go back to how this affidavit opens, because I think it's really well written and gripping. Not that anyone needs to be gripped by this affidavit, because we all knew that this is.
And let me say something else. It doesn't matter what law enforcement said outside of this affidavit. Okay, this affidavit is reality. What law enforcement said beforehand, law enforcement isn't, number one, they're not obligated to tell you anything, and they're certainly not obligated to tell you the truth, and they're not obligated to tell you anything that might give a problem for their investigation. So they give you very vague things. They say things, for instance, like the roommates didn't know anything. They were completely asleep, didn't see anything, right? Not true. Not true. But at the time, they're giving the public sort of general information. This is what matters. What's in this is reality. So if this conflicts with something you've heard somewhere else, this is it. This is what you should count on.
And the reason this counts is this officer, either by video or in person, had to swear in front of the judge to every word in this affidavit. Like with their right hand raised, they were given the oath and they swore to every word that they believed to be true in this affidavit. And then they signed it in front of the judge. And their entire credibility relies on this. A law enforcement officer who has a finding of dishonesty against them, basically their career's over. It's really hard to use a law enforcement officer on the stand again if they have any sort of dishonesty finding. And so that's why we keep pointing back to look at the affidavit. They swear to that. They don't swear to CNN and they don't swear to Twitter when they make statements at all. I'll zoom through this really quick because I want to start talking about what we think happened. The reason they're going between different time frames, they go to a camera at 4:17. And the reason they do that is they're bolstering their timeline because obviously DM went through a lot of trauma. And remember, she literally just woke up. She may or may not have even looked at the time. And so this is helping set a timeline because time matters here. So a camera very close to Xana's room, but not in their house, outside of their house, at 4:17 captures a dog barking, some sort of like thud, scuffle, and some whimpering. And that is consistent with what DM says, though she can't remember the exact time. She hears crying and she hears a man's voice. I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing this. You're okay. I'm going to help you. Something along those lines. So she hears the perpetrator's voice. She may not know it's the perpetrator at the time, but it is not a woman's voice.
Let me say about this, because it's important to me that by the end of this, we have diffused any blame on her for this. Remember, the thing that you would be thinking in the situation is not someone is murdering my roommates. You don't really know what's going on. All you know is one of my roommates, man, she's drunk. Who knows? Maybe she fell over. Maybe she ran into a table. Maybe she cut herself. That's probably her boyfriend. He's going to help her or whatever. You're just, you have to put yourself in this situation, right? And when she says, or in the affidavit it says, DM then said she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." There's no reason that should raise any alarm bells. If the voice said, "I'm going to kill you," that would be one thing, right? But just a male voice saying, "I'm going to help you," it's interesting in hindsight, right? But at this point, there's no reason to think that she would think anything is wrong. Very quickly, just because I saw somebody ask, why the police arrive at 4? They didn't. This officer arrived at 4. This officer and there were 1,000 officers who arrived on the scene that day. This officer and his partner arrived at 4. So that's what he's saying. But once again, they've decided to use him for this affidavit. He may not even be that important in the grand scheme of things. He's just the person. And that's when he got there.
Exactly. So another interesting thing, DM says that or at least she told police, that she opened her door a total of 3 times to kind of investigate what's going on. She doesn't see anything the first 2 times. She even looks out her window when she hears someone say, "Someone's here." But it wasn't until the 3rd time she hears the crying, so she opens her door again to investigate, and that's when she sees the killer, who's dressed in all black, covered just from really the nose down, so she can see the eyes and the eyebrows that she describes as bushy, and she could describe him pretty well, actually, to say that he's at least 5'10", that he's not muscular, but he's athletic build, and that he has bushy eyebrows. That's actually a very good description at that hour of night.
And let me add another thing. He is not wearing a ski mask. Okay, people keep saying, "Man, she saw somebody wearing a ski mask and didn't think anything of it." No. That is not what it says. He is wearing a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose. And as you all know, in the last 2 years, those are pretty common. Somebody wearing a mask that covers their mouth and nose. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything. The mask, obviously she saw his eyes, she saw his bushy eyebrows. It is not a ski mask, and people should just stop saying it's a ski mask. Or it might have been, but that's not how it's described. It's described as more just a mask that covers your mouth and nose, like the kind of mask a lot of people wear.
Exactly. Now, he walks towards her. So it sounds like he walks past her, actually, and she sees him walking towards her, and she at least is quoted saying she's frozen, in a state of shock, which makes sense to me. I would probably be as well. And he walks past her, doesn't interact with her, and walks out the sliding door. She's terrified. Makes sense. She doesn't have any reason, I think, at this time to believe that 4 of her roommates are dead. But what she does is also, again, understandable for a college girl who lives with at least 5 other people in a house that is known to have other visitors like that night, goes in her room and locks herself in the room. And that's all we know. So you can speculate all you want, but there's really no reason to, because her importance for the purposes of this affidavit is right there. She was an eyewitness to the things that were happening to her roommates, to what was happening at this time period, and also to identifying who she saw as walking out that door, and that he was one person as opposed to multiple people.
And let's talk about this, because this, I'm going to continue to focus on this because I am bothered by some of the reaction to this. She doesn't say, I saw a guy dripping with blood. She doesn't say, I saw a guy with a knife. She just saw somebody that she didn't know wandering around her house at 4 o'clock in the morning. She has a lot of roommates, right? It's a going out night. Everybody's been going out. She may just be thinking, oh my God, I don't know who that dude is. And I don't know why he's wandering around my house. Which idiot brought this guy home, right? I don't want to talk to this. This is like, I'm going to be pissed at somebody tomorrow. I'm going to have words with somebody tomorrow, right? For bringing some strange guy home. But for me, I'm closing my door and locking the door because I don't know who that guy is, right? I mean, look, here's what we know for certain. And I think, in any of these cases, whenever you're dealing with these and you're trying to figure out something, start with what we know is definitely true and work your way from there. What do we know is definitely true? She did not have anything to do with this, right? She didn't have anything to do with this. So she's an innocent person. She's an innocent bystander. That's the first thing. The second thing that we all should know for sure, she did not see that guy and think, he just killed my 4 roommates. I'm going to lock myself in my room and go to sleep and I'll deal with this tomorrow, right? She didn't think that. So whatever the complex human interaction is that's going on here with her, she obviously did not believe that this person had committed some grand crime in the house, or she would have called the police. She locked the door because she didn't want to have any interaction with this guy. She might have been surprised to see him. She might have had no idea who he was. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. She'd been drinking. There's all sorts of reasons she would do this, but any conspiracy theory that develops around this, or any, well, if only she'd called 911, maybe she could have saved somebody. Based on the description of this attack, I think that is not the case. And we should not saddle her with that, even if there is some outside chance that if she had been clairvoyant and realized that guy just stabbed 4 of my roommates, there's no world in which she is to blame for this. Or if she'd only called 911, everybody would have been saved, or something like that. That's just not true. People need to drop it. They need to leave it behind.
Hey, Brett.
She is going to get to testify about this eventually.
And adding to that, remember kind of the history of this house. We know from other reporting that the police have been called to this house before for noise complaints. Those of you who have ever gone to a party house or lived in a party house in college know that you don't want the police called to your house, especially if it's maybe a situation you just didn't know about. That this is not going to be a noise complaint issue. Maybe at the last noise complaint, the police were like, hey, if we get called out here again, someone's going to have to answer to it. These are college girls on a lease. They're going to be held liable if, there's some complaint there because their name is on a legal document and the police can find them. Or they don't want to get their roommates in trouble because they just didn't know who this person was. Again, there are lots of people who live in this house who have friends, and they are not all within the same friend circle. So it's absolutely possible that they could have visitors at their house that they don't recognize. So in addition to just being there's nothing about her testimony that indicates she thought a grand murder has happened, but also most people are not 911 happy. Most people think twice or 3 times before they dial 911, even when they see an emergency in front of them. We actually see this a lot. They assume someone else has called 911, or they're like, let me make sure what the situation is before I call 911, because guess what happens when you call 911? They show up with sirens. They wake up your neighborhood. They wake up your roommates. And what if it was for literally nothing?
You call 911 on the guy that your roommate's hooking up with that night. Just because you don't recognize him because you picked him up at a bar.
You're not going to live that down.
Yeah, you're not going to live that down. Remember, she doesn't know. She doesn't know that anything happened. All she knows is she's heard some vague things upstairs, and she knows that she sees a guy she doesn't recognize. That's all she knows. On the question of why he didn't kill her, and I don't want to get ahead of things, but I mean, a couple things. Number one, they found a footprint right outside her door. Maybe he didn't kill her because she locked the door. We think of him, and we often do this with murderers, as we think of them as omniscient. We think of them as having no fear. We think of them as being like all powerful almost, right? Because they're taking lives, and that's just something we can't recognize. By this point, he has killed 4 people. He probably came to that house not to kill 4 people. I think he probably came to that house to kill 1 person, honestly. But he's killed 4 people. He doesn't know everybody that's in that house. She's locked the door, maybe even tried the door. You could say we could try and break down the door, but he doesn't know who else is there, right? Like, we don't know that he knows this house as intimately as maybe we think he is. For instance, I bet he didn't expect Xana's boyfriend to be there. I bet that was a surprise to him. He may also be freaking out. He may also be thinking, I got to get out of here, right? Like, he's just killed 4 people. He's got to get out of there. There's all sorts of reasons that he would not, and he might not even seen her. She may have seen him and he didn't see her. That's also a possibility. There's all sorts of reasons that he might have just thought, I got to get out of here. I've killed 4 people. He might have been freaking out. As we're going to talk about, he left his sheath behind. So it's not like he's a perfect cold-blooded murderer. He's already made mistakes. So there's just all sorts of explanations for why he didn't kill her that make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. By murder 4, and Brett, we'll talk about our theories in a second. I think you're right. I think he came to kill 1 person. And by this point, he had killed 3 more than he intended to kill, even if he came. And I do think this was incredibly premeditated. He was going to kill someone that night. And it just happened that he ended up having to kill 3 more people to carry out his premeditated 1 murder. And in doing so, remember the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that's pumping through your body. One of the effects, by the way, of cortisol and immense adrenaline, for those of you who have played sports and gotten injured while you're in the midst of sports, you get blind spots. You can't actually see certain things because your body is on such high alert. And at that point, he may have been like, just killed number 4, 3 more than I meant to. Time to get to my car right now, this very second. He sees the door, and it happens that DM is on his way to the door, but he doesn't even see her. This is like the goal line if you're playing sports. He's going for that door because he knows where his car is. He knows exactly what door he needs to open to get into the car. And we know from cameras that he speeds off. So he's not lackadaisically driving. He clearly has adrenaline coursing through his body. So he may have absolutely not seen her, or he was like, okay, gotten away with 4, now time to go. So I'm actually of the mind that he probably didn't even fully comprehend the fact that she was there because of the amount of adrenaline in his body.
I don't want to take up all our time on this, but I think you have to remember, and we may be wrong about this, but I personally believe he was going to the 3rd floor to kill someone. The reason he killed Xana and the reason he killed Ethan is because they were between him and his goal. Once he had accomplished his goal, his new goal is to get out. She is not between him and getting out. Even if he sees her, even if he knows she saw him, his goal is to get out. He doesn't have to kill her to get out. And by that point, getting out is his main thing. And so that's what he does. And to me, it is not a huge surprise that he passes her up.
I think she's incredibly lucky. I think she easily could have been killed because, like we'll get into in our theories, I think 3 of the people were kind of innocent bystanders, so to speak. They were not the target of his murder, and he had to murder them. And so one of those people being Xana's boyfriend, I think had he not been spending the night there, he probably would be alive today. Had the girls upstairs not been sharing beds, I think only one of them probably would have been murdered because I think one of them was probably the target. And we'll talk more about that. So, okay, that's the affidavit. There's a lot more in the affidavit. That's the timeline. You should know that it actually opens before the timeline. It actually opens with almost like a novel narrative. It starts with like a detective scene, right? Like he shows up. He's clearly not the first law enforcement on the scene, and he's being led through the death scene by someone who's already assessed the situations, and the bodies are all still there. And he describes where he finds each of the deceased victims, which again, I don't usually see in a probable cause affidavit. That's why I say it kind of opens almost like a novel or a movie, because he's putting out there, this is incredibly gruesome. This is a quadruple murder. This isn't just some bullet from a drive-by shooting that errantly went through the door and happened to strike someone dead. This was calculated and it was gruesome, and he is walking through the scene first. Then he goes through the timeline. And then the rest of the affidavit is a little bit more granular. It reads more like a search warrant return. They clearly, and he says it, they get his cell phone records, and they also get his cell phone records, and then they identify the car as well, which then leads to the cameras and the car, and then leading to his phone number.
I just want to reiterate what we said last time. Great police work.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Brett. Let me finish off what the last part of the affidavit is for anyone who doesn't want to read it. The last part is the police work part, right? This is what you painstakingly walk your experts through on the stand. So they mention a CAST expert from the FBI who looks at cell towers. There's only so many of them in the entire country. They are walking. I love those guys. I mean, there really are not that many of them. There's dozens of them, not
CAST is amazing. It's amazing. I mean, you talk about your taxpayer dollars at work, tiny little unit that does, wow.
We're not even going to tell you how many people are in it because then maybe more people will commit crimes. But
yeah, seriously.
woo, they're the awesome force that multiplies in their importance across the nation. But they walk through the rest of the affidavit and you might start getting kind of bogged down because they didn't need to go into that much detail. They could have really just said, we analyzed all the security cameras and the cell phone records, and we found this summary of a map of where he traveled on these days. They could have done that, but they don't. They literally walk it step by step in the way you do in trial, because in trial, you can't make those summary statements. You have to do all of your work, like a math proof, and show how you created that summary map of where his car went, where his car was spotted, why we think that matters, and how his cell phone corroborates the security cameras that catch his car. And the reason they're doing that, by the way, is they are tying him to the car and the phone, and that they are tied together. And this is why at the press conference, the law enforcement said, we are confident we have the person who did this. And they're doing that through this affidavit because they are showing that there is no one else involved, and also no one else carrying that phone, no one else driving his car, because we can imagine a roommate that borrows the car. We can imagine he shares a cell phone with a girlfriend, or he gets a burner phone. They're showing through this affidavit that none of those things are true. All of the signs and all of the data points back to one person, and that person being who they arrested.
Yeah, if the police ever stop you and ask you if you ever let anybody borrow your car, gun, knife, or whatever, your answer is, oh yeah, all the time. All the time. I let them borrow it all the time. Just whoever wants it can borrow it, right? Because that question is always to lock you in to you are the only one who uses the item that they have determined is critical to their investigation. And in this case, this white Honda Elantra is just absolutely critical because 50 years ago, I'm not even going to say 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, this guy would still be on the run. 20 years ago, he definitely would be. He would become a serial killer. And they might eventually catch him, right? But because of the proliferation of security cameras, they were able to do this forensic video search. And what's really interesting about this is this guy, he had studied all this, right? This was his thing. I mean, that's what's crazy about this. He very clearly is attempting to commit the perfect murder. That's what I think. I think he was obsessed with committing the perfect murder. And he was trying to do that here. And we'll talk about more about that later. But the police, they're like, look, we're going to look at every video camera in the area and try and find something. And they found this white Honda Elantra that was behaving very strangely. It's driving, or they see it on video, basically driving up and down the street, doing 3-point turns, coming back down the street. And then the only time they don't see it, when the murders are happening. And then all of a sudden they see it again. And in I don't know, you guys ever seen Zootopia? In Zootopia, there's a point in Zootopia where they're using camera footage to follow a vehicle at various different points so they can determine where it came from. And they followed this white Honda Elantra all the way back to Washington State University. And they couldn't figure out exactly where it went, but they found it that far. And then eventually they looked at the Washington State University registration. And what do they find? They find a white Honda Elantra that is this guy's. It's his vehicle. Once they have that and they have him, then they are able to do all the sort of other things with the cell phone pings and looking at where his cell phone was. And once they look at that, I mean, there's some great stuff there.
Okay, so that's really important. This is how we think, based on this affidavit, the investigation unfolded. guys, they zeroed in on him very early on. So I think if you remember back to all those press conferences, some people were criticizing the law enforcement for saying like there's no danger to the community, yet this wasn't by someone they knew. And people were like, then how are we not in danger if you haven't caught the person? I think they zeroed in earlier on. We'll talk about enough evidence to actually arrest. They did not have enough evidence to arrest, but they had eyes on him 24/7. If that guy was about to move again, run, hurt someone else, they were gonna absolutely, do an emergency arrest, which you can do without an affidavit. And so I think it was true when they said there's no risk to the rest of the community, because they were pretty sure very early on that it was one perpetrator, that they were zeroing in on that person, and they had eyes on his car and his cell phone. They were probably in real time tracking him at all times from November, and they were going to watch him to make sure he didn't do anything else to anyone else in the community. But they could not yet arrest him because they didn't have the evidence they needed to secure a conviction. And they were not going to mess this up because this was too important. Look at this. This is good police work. This is a good affidavit. These have been good. They've kept everything under seal. They knew all this long ago and none of it leaked. That's amazing police work. Like, well done to them for doing that. Now you begin to see in hindsight why they were able to say the things they did, and they weren't trying to mislead the public. But the reason this investigation went anywhere, because think back to day one, 4 people dead, devastated roommate, DM. All we really have is her sleepy, in the dark description of a generic white guy with bushy eyebrows, which is open to interpretation, wearing all black, who is 5'10"-ish, which could be, again, half the people on the West Coast, most of the people she goes to school with or sees around town. Not a lot of description. She didn't see a car. So what they did is they went straight to the security cameras, and that's when they identified the car. Now, notice, if you read the affidavit, they don't have to show you all their work, but they do. So we're reading between the lines. But notice that when they first take it to kind of the car identifying expert, I think it's the FBI, they come back with something like 2011 to 2013, whatever it is, Hyundai Elantra, right? And notice his car's a 2015. So it doesn't fall within that very narrow expert opinion. I think what happened is they got this like, okay, it's probably 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. And they've searched everywhere. They were very broad in their searching, and they found the 2015 Hyundai Elantra, went back to the expert and said, is there any way that this could have actually been something after 2013? And I mean, this happens all the time, by the way. They're not trying to influence the expert, but this is like a grainy video. You couldn't see any sort of they couldn't read plates or anything like that. All they could see were that the front of the car didn't have plates, and that it was a white sedan. That's as much as you could probably tell. If you've seen like gas station security cameras, this is probably the quality of camera that they're looking at. So they go back to the expert, I'm guessing, and said, is there any possibility, like, did the Hyundai Elantra change so much after 2013 that this window couldn't open? And the expert probably was like, oh yeah, no, the sedan body didn't change in any way. Certainly not in a way that would be so distinguishable in a fuzzy security camera. You could distinctively say, like, there's no way that could be 2015. So it got broadened. But I think the only reason it got broadened is that was when they honed in on Bryan Kohberger. That's when they, for whatever reason, we'll hear more about it, zeroed in on him. And they wanted to see if this still fit the expert opinion, which it did.
And let me just say, in a case where there wasn't this much information and this much evidence, that inconsistency would be the kind of thing a defense attorney would jump on in a trial, right? Defense attorney would put that expert on the stand and say, isn't it true that you initially said this was a 2011 to 2013? Yes. And isn't it true that when they found out my client's car was 2015, you changed your testimony, right? I mean, that is the kind of thing they would do. But fortunately, that is not all. And Alice mentioned that they could tell there was no license plate on the front. And I don't know. I love circumstantial evidence. People knock circumstantial evidence all the time. I just love it so much. It just makes me happy. Like the fact that Pennsylvania does not require a front license plate, but Idaho does. It's just little things like that are in the affidavit. Just make me happy. It just made me kind of giddy.
And real quick, I think Mona's saying this right now, and probably other people have said this. How could they not know the exact make and model? Guys, have you seen these security cameras? I mean, we haven't seen them here. It's not included in the affidavit. But Brett and I look at like security footage of cars all the time. And think about this. This is what we see. We look at these all the time in drug deals, right? Because they're usually happening in the dark in sedans. Sedans are so common because they're 4-door and they look like a shape. It's dark, which means that you have your headlights on, which means the camera reflects the light of the headlights. And mostly what you see is headlights driving away.
Right.
I mean, just go on YouTube and look up like gas station security camera. So we've seen a ton of these. The fact that they could even say it was a Hyundai Elantra, I am very impressed. And remember, cars don't change that much from year to year. Notice it's like a 5-year span. I don't know. I drive like a 12-year-old car.
And all cars look the same these days too. So there's that.
They actually do kind of look the same. Like there's like a sedan and then there's like kind of a hatchback and there's kind of an SUV, but they all can look the same when you're talking about low resolution cameras in the dark of night that reflect off the headlights that you're probably driving with, which obscure like a head-on view of the car. And so just so you know that this is actually more specific than I normally get. My experts typically tell me something like, it's a sedan.
It's a car. This is obviously a vehicle of some
That's not
sort.
Helpful.
Possibly a truck or an SUV, maybe a small compact.
Perhaps a tow truck. And you're like, thanks, that's
helpful.
Not helpful at all. So I just wanted to give you a little view into, yes, they're experts. If they were to look at the car in person or a real picture of it taken in ideal conditions, they can tell you the make and model of the car. But that's not what they're working off of at all.
It's like that old joke. It's like, picture of galaxy a million light years away. It's like beautiful, right? And then it's like, picture of man standing in front of camera and all you see is like pixels, and it's basically that. So, I'm amazed that they did what they did, but they did. And then that's really what got the ball rolling, right? Because they had the car, then they identified him. And from that point forward, they were able to go after his cell phone and get cell phone pings. And what they found was frankly disturbing. It's really interesting to read it because they start off just the hours around the murder. And what do they find? Nothing. Which, once the whole story is told, you realize that the reason they find nothing is because the cell phone is off. And those of you who listen to Big Mad True Crime and Heather Ashley know that when your cell phone's off, one of two things is happening. Either you're being a victim of a crime or you're committing a crime, right? And so they broaden the search. And what do they find? Number one, on that night, they find that his cell phone is heading towards Moscow until suddenly it goes off. And then it's off for a couple hours. And then after the murders, it's heading away from Moscow back towards Washington State. So he turned off his phone while he was committing the murders. He was smart enough to do that. This is circumstantial evidence, by the way. Once again, he's smart enough to do that. But then the fact that his cell phone is not pinging for the hours around the murder is evidence of itself. And then when they broaden the search even more, what do they discover? He has been to that place, I think it was 12 times. 12 times since June.
August.
Correct me. August.
They got records back to June because that's when he moved there. And he'd had the phone since June 2022, but since August. So since the day before his PhD program started, basically when he moved out there.
Yeah. So he moves out there. He identifies these people some way, and there's all sorts of speculation about why that is. Maybe he's vegan, and they had vegan options at the restaurant. So maybe he went there, and for some reason he latched onto one of them. We don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out. But what we know for certain is that in the months leading up to this, multiple times at night, late at night, he is driving out there to that place and scoping it out multiple times, a dozen times before the murder actually happens.
Let's step back for a second. So up until basically he goes back to Pennsylvania, because a lot of people ask, why did they let him leave? Why did they let him drive across the country? Up until the time he leaves to go back home to Pennsylvania for the holidays, what we have is a roommate who can describe a generic male, right? Probably can't pick him out of a lineup because half his face is covered, can just say generally how tall he is, generally his build, and something about eyebrows. That's all we have. She doesn't see the car, so she can't corroborate that. We have a car that's seen in fuzzy security footage driving a lot to a place. Now, it's not illegal to drive 10 miles from your house. In fact, I probably go to my local the restaurant I go to all the time. You'll see my phone ping there all the time. So it's not illegal to drive around and visit other cities. And then you have his cell phone records, which put together with everything we have now looks damning, right? He goes there lots of times, but the hours around the murder, it goes dark. Think about a defense attorney. If this is all you have right now, you're saying that I'm a generic white guy with eyebrows, and I don't think my eyebrows are that bushy. I like them this way. Everyone has eyebrows like this. I don't wear eyebrow liner. And the one person who sees me never says anything about my car. You're having to go back to your expert to change, the make and model or the year of the car in order to fit my guy's profile into your tiny little definition of who you've zeroed in on, police. And then your best evidence is that what? My phone is not around the murder scene at all. Sure, I'm driving around, but you can't put me at the murder scene. So you're saying the lack of me being at the murder scene is reason to believe that I murdered them? That's absolutely not reasonable doubt. That's what I would say as defense counsel. So keep that in mind. That's all they have at this point. If I'm a prosecutor, I don't want to risk it. I don't want to risk it yet, even though I know it's him. I am not ready to go to court and go to trial with that evidence yet, because there is a lot of room for a defense attorney to argue that there is reasonable doubt and it's circumstantial evidence and it's zeroing in on this guy who's maybe socially awkward, there's no reason to believe it's him. And he has no criminal record. We know that because of what we'll talk about in a second with DNA. His DNA did not hit within CODIS. We know that. I think police said that, but also based on the DNA they had to do here, they had to do a trash pull because that means that they had to find DNA to make a separate match rather than run him through a system of known perpetrators so that he would hit. So he is not a known perpetrator. That's what I would say as a defense attorney. So that's why they had to let him go across the country as they're waiting for more evidence to come in. They weren't stopping. They weren't leaving this to chance. They weren't just going to pull him over a bunch of times on traffic stops along the way. They were waiting actually for a lot of these returns to come back and to do a proper DNA match.
There is something to be said for the fact that they did not rush this. Like they should be praised for that because they were under so much pressure. And Alice and I have seen this. I mean, there are times when officers or even prosecutors want to push ahead with a case because they say, we have probable cause. We have probable cause. So why aren't we arresting this guy? Right. And a lot of times it falls to the prosecutors say, that's great. I need beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm not going to arrest someone and indict them unless I feel like we have it beyond a reasonable doubt. What seems like happened here is everybody understood that. Once they had the car and the cell phone pings, they probably had probable cause. But they wanted to nail this down. So they didn't rush it, despite the pressure and despite the immense pressure to make an arrest. They kept doing what they knew was the right thing, and they kept looking and they kept gathering evidence. Now, one thing somebody mentioned in the chat room, which is fascinating, is the cell phone ping from 9 o'clock that morning, which tells you that he went back there. And I think the reason he went back there is he wanted to see the aftermath. He was hoping that the bodies would have already been found, the police would be there. He wanted to see that and relive the murders. And that's something you see a lot from killers. I think he probably was disappointed when he got there and there was like nothing going on. But that is a really interesting thing that his phone pinged right around that house at 9 o'clock that morning. This guy, and we can talk about this more, this guy he's cold-blooded. I mean, he is right up there with a lot of the serial killers you talk about a lot of times. I mean, I think this guy, he would have killed again. I just have no doubt in my mind that he would have killed again if he had not been caught.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who read the timeline of the affidavit, the DNA hit did not come until like December, basically when they filed this affidavit. Here's one thing to note about it. A lot of you are saying, oh, there's a lot of DNA. We don't actually know that he left behind a lot of DNA. And here's why. The DNA that they reference as being part of the match is actually incredibly small. They're talking about touch DNA. They said that there was a fingerprint on the button of the sheath to the knife that he left behind. That remember we've talked about this before. There's lots of forms of DNA. There's your hair. There's, you cut your hand, you drop blood everywhere. That's a lot of DNA. You have a lot to work with, which means you can run it through testing multiple times and it'll be consumed, but you could probably run multiple tests. Touch DNA, when you touch a computer screen, when you touch a window, you'll see a little bit left behind. That's also DNA, but it's very little DNA. It's not going to be perfect because most people don't, press their thumbs perfectly to have a perfect fingerprint. It's going to be partial. It may have rubbed off over time because he may have worn gloves that night. That might be why there's not very much DNA. And so that fingerprint may have been old. All you need to know is that what they're referencing is not actually a ton of DNA. They didn't find a bloody shirt. They didn't find a bloody shoe print that we know of. What we know is that they have this tiny amount of DNA that they're working with, which means they probably don't have a lot to work with, and they probably kind of have one shot to do a match. That's important to know because that may be why they are taking their time. They want to make sure they have the right test to match it against in order to use up the DNA that they have. They may have that one chance to lift that DNA off of that button in order to do this, and it could have come back inconclusive, and they would have been back to where I was, going off 10 minutes ago if I were defense counsel.
And Miles is asking, couldn't they just say it was a party house? That's where the DNA came from. I think that's why the DNA that's referenced is not general DNA in the house. It is from the sheath. So basically the killer, somehow the sheath that he had the knife in was left behind. Once again, everybody thinks killers are geniuses and perfect. They make mistakes all the time. That's usually how they're caught. That DNA is from the knife sheath. That being random is unlikely. Right. And that is one of the reasons they use that DNA in particular to tie him to the crime. So there may have been DNA other places. There may have been, and they may have said, you know what? We're not going to use the DNA on, the kitchen counter or the bedpost or whatever for all the reasons that you would think of. But that being tied to the murder weapon and having the DNA on it, very powerful.
Exactly. That's a great point, Brett. There could have been blood and there could have been hair, but there probably was from a lot of people, maybe not the blood, but the hair and the skin parts or whatnot, because so many people lived there and so many people visited or partied at this house. That is one of those, the jury hears that this DNA is coming from the killing knife sheath. That's powerful, right?
And once again, remember, and I feel like people do this a lot. Do not get yourself tunnel vision on one piece of evidence. You have to think of all the evidence together, right? So you have his DNA there, and you have his car driving around, and you have the cell phone evidence. And when all that comes together, it makes it very hard to argue the DNA is just random, right? Oh, so the DNA is random from a party, and you just happen to be driving by that night, and your cell phone just happened to go dark as you were heading in that direction. Once you put all that together, then it's much more difficult to sort of try and poke holes in the case.
I want to go back to something really quick. Some of you were like, well, why was he not smart enough? a lot of questions of if he thought he was doing the perfect crime or not. Clearly he made lots of mistakes. But again, this was good police work. A lot of this could have been missed. Yes, he turned off his phone during the hours of the murder, but not all the times he drove by, including later that morning. That's super typical. Remember, we say this all the time. People delete texts and incriminating photos off their phone. Law enforcement can recover it. They think that, law enforcement will only be looking at the hours around. They may not be thinking that data exists all the way back to when they first got the phone back in June 2022. And so while he obviously studies this, there are lots of ways. There's a reason that law enforcement, for the most part, can stay one step ahead of perpetrators because they've had to develop this over time. Maybe back in the day, they could just look at the hours around the murder, but not anymore because enough of us listen to true crime podcasts and know how cell phone pings work that we know because we have lay people telling you to turn off your phones when you commit crimes. So now they've had to stay one step ahead of the lay person, and they do. There's a lot more that they know than you may know. So even though he studies criminology, he was not a perfect criminal, obviously. But also, in another situation, this would not have been a slam dunk that he would have been caught. Very, very easily. This could have been a situation with a little bit more sloppy police work that he could have gotten away with this.
And, so now they know he's heading to Pennsylvania. They're following him at all times. Somebody asked about why they didn't do the trash pull from his house. You hear different things about that. apparently he was pretty careful with his trash. Maybe his parents weren't as careful as he was. Who knows, right? But in any event, they're following him across country. He gets stopped twice in Indiana. I've read the same reports you have that those are coincidental. You'll never convince me they're coincidental.
It's not coincidental.
The way these investigations work, because you call the state trooper in the state or on the road or whatever where you want someone to be stopped, and you say, hey, develop independent probable cause. Stop this person. Get them on body cam. We want to see what they do. Right? So basically, the state trooper would have seen the car they're looking for. He'd follow it, and he would wait until he violates one of the 10,000 laws which you can be stopped for in any state. He changed lanes without using his blinker. He was driving too fast. He was driving too slow. He drifted across the fog line. His tent seemed like it was a little too dark. There's just any number of things. Then you pull the guy over, and then you get him on body camera. You can see his face if you want to show that to a witness. I mean, we don't know exactly why they stopped him, but you can show his face to a witness. You can see if he has any wounds on his hands or anything like that. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons you would do that. You can see how he reacts. Is he freaking out? Does he seem like he's overly concerned? There's just all sorts of reasons to stop him. And I think that's probably what happened as he's sort of heading back to Pennsylvania. And then once they get him to Pennsylvania, they do this trash pull. The DNA evidence, I think, is going to be really interesting in this case, because I think there's more than what's in the affidavit. But the affidavit tells us that essentially they got his dad's DNA, is what it sounds like. They got his dad's DNA and determined that with a 99.9999 whatever percent certainty, the DNA that they recovered at the scene would have been, this person would have been the father, right? And that's sort of the last paragraph you see, and that cinches it. So they've got all this other evidence, then you add DNA. They're going to arrest him. This is a very thorough affidavit. I don't think it's everything they have. I think they probably have even more. But clearly, I mean, if you've read this and you think this is going to be a difficult case, then I don't want you on my jury.
When I read this, I literally was like, whoo. I don't know. So every court is different. I think he did not see this, right, until his initial appearance. It depends on the court. Sometimes like the attorney can ask for it early. They may have refused to until he showed up in court because of, there's a gag order in place, whatever. But if his attorney had seen this ahead of time, I don't think they would have made the statements they did in public. But, everyone deserves vigorous defense, of course. This is written. Okay, why did they have so much detail? I think they have learned. This law enforcement, I think, has been watching all of the missteps, nice drink, all the missteps by other law enforcement in very high profile cases. You can talk about Delphi, you can talk about any other case, but we in the past year have seen a lot of very high profile affidavits come out unsealed, law enforcement press releases, press conferences, the like, and some of them have not gone as well as you would have hoped. And it sounds like they exist in a world where they know that we all exist. That podcasters exist, that Reddit exists. In fact, the affidavit mentions Reddit, right? They're doing research on Reddit. And yeah, by the way, law enforcement hangs out on Reddit. So be careful what you do there. And I think they do that to be smart because you have to know what the populace is doing to stay one step ahead. So they are not, kind of this living this monastic life, the law enforcement. They absolutely have a thumb on what's happening out here because they recognize out here is your jury pool. And I think this is why it's so detailed and they were very eager to get it unsealed, is because though they're under a gag order, they can't say anything to the press right now. This 19-page affidavit says everything you would want your potential jury to hear. I mean, those of you who read it and who still think there's reasonable doubt, I'd love to hear from you because I would like to learn from you how I can never win a case in front of you.
And look, even if there is, I mean, I as detailed as this is, I guarantee it's not all they have. I guarantee it's not all they have. There's been a lot of talk about genetic genealogy and its role in that. Doesn't really appear in here unless it has to do with his dad. I think those reports are probably true. I think we're going to learn a lot more. And I'll say a couple things about it. Number one, and this is important because a lot of people have said this: innocent until proven guilty. What does that mean? Okay. It means that he deserves a vigorous defense. He deserves a trial. He deserves a jury of his peers. The prosecution has to put on its evidence. They have to convince that jury he's guilty. And until they do that, his life can't be taken from him. His property can't be taken from him. That's the way we do it in this system. It doesn't mean a couple things. Number one, it certainly doesn't mean, because I saw somebody say this, it certainly doesn't mean that the police can't believe the guy they just arrested, and the prosecution, who is now going to seek the death penalty against this person, they have to maintain some sort of weird, like, quasi doubt. Like, I saw people saying, is it a problem that the police said in the press conference that this was their guy? No, the police believe it's their guy. That's why they arrested him. That's why he's being prosecuted. You, as just an ordinary citizen, if you want to sort of maintain your doubt, that's great. I love that. But you don't have to ignore common sense. You know, you're not on the jury, right? I don't know. I just feel like there's this, and I guess it's not necessarily a bad thing if people take the whole innocent until proven guilty thing to an extreme, but you can look at the evidence and make your own judgment. You know, he's going to be tried. And if he's acquitted, the jury will be wrong. I mean, I'll just go ahead and tell you, they will be wrong, right? He did this. He committed this crime. He killed these people. That is what happened. And there's going to be even more evidence to prove that. The other thing I will say about this is just because he pleads guilty doesn't mean he avoids a death penalty. You know, a lot of people have said he's going to plead guilty to avoid death penalty. That's a deal. He could take a deal where the prosecution agrees to take the death penalty off the table. If it were me, and this is easy to say, sitting here not prosecuting this case, I would not offer that deal. Not with this evidence. I would be like, if you want to plead guilty and throw yourself on the mercy of the court, have fun. We are seeking the death penalty regardless. This person killed 4 people. He killed 4 young people viciously, violently, and just one of the most horrendous murders you can imagine. If there is any point to having the death penalty in Idaho, it is for this guy. So I hope that the prosecution doesn't take that deal. Because what I think he would love to sit in prison for the rest of his life and be infamous as the guy who, you know, the co-ed killer, or whatever name he's going to assign to himself. So that's what I hope the prosecution does. We'll have to see. Do I think this will go to trial? Not after reading this. I think his defense attorneys are going to tell him, you need to plead guilty. You need to throw yourself on the mercy of the court, and maybe you'll get lucky and get life in prison.
Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, just depends.
Okay. So what happened?
Yeah. So people have asked, like, okay, number one, this redacted page is obviously just an extra page. Because
it got scanned and it's like the back page.
Because if you read it, page. Autopsy report provided by Spokane, and then it's redacted page. And then the next page is county medical examiner. So clearly that was an accident. All the other redactions are just names, the people they redact. The second thing is, why do we think it's one person? It's just a hunch. I mean, for me, it's just a hunch. Now, Alice made a really good point, and I'm going to let her make it because I don't want to steal it, about why she thinks there was a targeted person. So go ahead, Alice.
This is just based on the same 19 pages that you all can read for yourself, so you can reach a completely different conclusion. But based on what we read here, what I think happened, and I think the manner in which people were killed, was that he came in and he'd been stalking one of them. I think it was Goncalves, because I think he actually opened the door to her room, knowing which room it was, and her dog was in there, but she wasn't. They were in Mogan's bed instead. And so I think that's when the roommate, DM downstairs, woke up, because he opened the door and heard the dog upstairs. He saw the dog, saw she wasn't in there, quickly closed the door. And I think that's why the camera picks up the dog barking, because the dog, may not have known that the perpetrator was in the other room, but if your door's open and it's not your owner, the dog might start barking. He instead may have been scouting the place, knew that they often slept in each other's rooms, or just knew that they were best friends, then found Goncalves, who he was actually going after. And I think it's her, because the sheath was actually left next to her, and went for her. And because they're in the same single bed, a single bed is really small. Like, I think I'm too fat these days to even share a single bed with anybody. So like, they are probably touching each other, and there's probably no way to just kill one of them without waking the other. So he's like, well, they're together, whatever. He probably knew that they were best friends if he'd been watching them for so long, but he's like, okay, whatever. I have to kill both of them. They're in the same bed. They're very close to each other. It's going to be impossible to kill one, not the other. Kills them swiftly, by the way. And that's part of what what you hear upstairs. He comes downstairs I think he was going to leave at that point. I think he came just to kill the one girl upstairs, opens wrong door, sets off dog, has to kill 2 girls, comes down. Xana has been up on TikTok. She hears something upstairs, says to her boyfriend, I think he's asleep. And she says, hey, someone's here. I think she gets up, looks out, and he sees her because she's the one out of the bed as described in the affidavit. And he sees her, panics, whatever. I don't know what it is. May have thought she was by herself. Killed her, realized that there was another person in the room, killed him as well. And at this point is like, look, I have killed way more people than I came to do. And now like other people are waking up. May or may not have seen DM, may not have cared at this point. Adrenaline running crazy, sees his exit, goes for the exit, and heads out and flies out of there in his car. That's based on the limited information we have in the affidavit. I say limited because there's going to be more information that we don't know. I think that's why I think they died upstairs first. That's what woke him up. That's what alerted Xana that someone was around, and she was clearly awake at this time to be able to hear it. And she was more with it than probably DM was, because DM sounds like she was just coming out of sleep, whereas Xana was awake enough to have ordered DoorDash, opened the door for DoorDash, gotten DoorDash, probably was eating at this point and playing on TikTok. So she's fully aware, fully able to assess her surroundings. And maybe the perpetrator saw that and knew like one person's completely sleepy, is groggy, has no idea what's going on. The other one is like about to reach for her phone or has her phone clearly on, can see the screen because she's on TikTok and thinks that she's going to call 911. And so thinks he has to kill her so that he has time to get away. So that's what I think happened.
That's a great theory. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about that. I mean, I think you could see either him killing Xana on the way up, opening the door, dog, killing the others, flees, or the way you describe it. And frankly, I mean, you hate to speculate about why someone didn't die, but if he went up there to kill one person, he finds 2 people in the same bed, he kills 2 people, he wants to leave. Look, I know he's a cold-blooded killer, but thinking about killing someone and actually doing it are two very different things. You know, he kills these 2 people. He obviously is whatever enough to lose the sheath, which was an important piece of evidence against him. He goes down, he kills 2 other people. You can really imagine just his urgency to get out at that point and really just think, I got to get out of here. And when he sees the girl and he can get out without having to kill her, he just goes. Right. I mean, there's a lot of different things about how exactly this went down. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's interesting to all of us, I think, because we want to know and we have a desire to know how this happened. As far as the trial goes, it doesn't matter at all. Right. Just like the motive doesn't matter. People keep asking, why? I don't know. The only person who knows for certain why this happened is him. And unless he tells us, we will all never know. Right. We will never know. It could have been as simple as they were walking down the street and he smiled at one of them and they didn't smile at him and he thought her. You know, I mean, he clearly, in my mind, he clearly wanted to kill someone. Like this was a thing for him. He was obsessed with this. I truly believe that. I think he was obsessed with committing a murder and experiencing it and getting away with it if he could.
I think he wanted to get inside the mind of a killer, and the best way for him to do that in an academic sense was to become the killer. I mean, yeah. That's based on nothing except looking at his face and like the way he's kind of acted throughout all of this and his actions before the killing and after the killing. And obviously with, you know, his interest in this area, he was interested enough in it to pursue a PhD. And by the way, if you look at when he starts stalking or casing out this house, pretty soon after he starts his PhD, right? Like this is probably something he's thought about for a long time. He's maybe even cased out other places in Pennsylvania. He's probably thought about doing this for a long time. And this was just, he'd done enough research at this point and was like, time to execute. Only he knows this, but I don't think it was by accident that night. And yeah, some of you are saying you thought he went to kill everybody in that room. I'm not sure he went to kill everyone, because then I think he would have done a more thorough job and he would have known people lived on the first floor and gone to kill everyone in the house. And he didn't do that. The fact that he started, I think, upstairs, I think the timeline supports that. And then that would have allowed him, if everyone was asleep, to have started upstairs and just leave. He wouldn't have had to kill everyone. Otherwise, you might want to start from the bottom, go up. I don't know. So obviously, it doesn't matter. And the motive, I don't even really love speculating because it doesn't matter. It kind of gets into a sideshow. We don't know from this affidavit. The police do not know. We may never know. And kind of like Brett said, it may not make any sense at all. But I do think he targeted someone in this house. That's why he drove there so many times. Maybe just from going to a party there.
There's a couple things, number one, I used to work for the state and did a lot of death penalty cases and saw a lot of murder cases. And man, people kill people for the stupidest reasons. I think all of us, as people who've never murdered anyone and hopefully never would, imagine that the only reason you would murder someone is for a really serious reason, right? Like they got to have a really good reason to do it. And everybody wants a really good motive for it. And in reality, man, you see people who kill people over the stupidest, the most petty stuff, right? And if you're the kind of person who kills somebody, a lot of times the motive will shock you. It really will. So there's not necessarily a good reason why he targeted any of these people. And I understand why everybody wants it, but it may just not be there. And a couple things about online stuff. Look, you guys have all speculated about it. There was a poster, I think it was on Facebook, who was obsessed with the sheath and had decided that was how they knew what the knife was because the person left the sheath behind. And that really is weird, isn't it? And I know some people have said it's debunked and it's not him, but man, what a strange thing. Would it surprise me if this person was following this murder closely online and even commenting in groups? Wouldn't shock me at all. I don't know if it's that guy, but if it's not him, then that person was really tuned in to what happened in this case, because speculating that that's how they knew what the knife was based on the sheath. When I first read it, I thought, well, that's stupid. They know the knife because they've looked at the stab wounds, not because of the sheath. Sure enough, he left the sheath behind, right? I don't know. It's a crazy case.
And here's another thing. There's a lot of things, actually. I know I said I wouldn't speculate about his motive, but he has indicated, I don't know through his attorney or by him, I can't remember what it is, that he's innocent. I think there is a world in which he lives where this is all an academic exercise. This is all part of his PhD program. And like I said earlier, the only way to get inside a killer's mind is to become the killer. And this is all still academic to him, which might go towards some sort of insanity defense. I don't know. Someone mentioned he's going to plead if he doesn't plead, he's going to throw all the defenses at the wall, including insanity. Absolutely. Because anyone would say anyone who kills 4 people and walks by one and doesn't kill them is insane. And if I were a defense attorney, I definitely would try to get some sort of medical assessment to see if he was in his right mind. But you can imagine a world where this is all still academic to him, and that he is still doing a research project, and that he is innocent because maybe he had no ill will. He may have had zero ill will towards anyone he killed at all. We see this in serial killers when they kill animals. They don't think that they're ending a life. It's like, what happens when this knife goes to the heart? I want to see it stop beating. And it's like an academic exercise almost. And that's kind of what separates serial killers from the rest of us, is we have empathy and the ability to put ourselves in other people's or dogs or animals' shoes and not commit horrendous crimes like that. So remember, the fact that he's carried this out already puts him kind of in a stratosphere that's probably not where most of our minds go. And I wonder if his defense will go somewhere there as well.
And can I just say, people keep saying Idaho doesn't have the insanity defense. I don't know anything about Idaho law when it comes to the insanity defense. You cannot convict an insane person for murder under the United States Constitution. So,
which is the supremacy clause.
Whatever Idaho does, like if he's literally insane to the point he can't tell the difference between good and evil, and he thinks that like Martians are coming down and telling him what to do, he can't be convicted and executed just as a matter of due process. So people keep saying that. Like I said, I don't know how it works in Idaho, but there is a defense of I am completely and utterly insane. Always.
Again, I'm going to play defense attorney real quick. Like, maybe he really is vegan. If not, this is a great act for a long game of a defense to be like, how could I possibly recognize I kill when I live a life that doesn't kill? I'm literally being a defense counsel here saying I think he lives in a different reality than I do in a lot of ways. But the fact that there are so many articles out there about his food choices, you have to exploit all of this in your defense when you are defense counsel. Like, if I'm his defense counsel, I'm absolutely latching onto that right now. How that does not, in a sane person's mind, being vegan, you have to understand why he's vegan, but let's say it's for purposes of not wanting to end a life with someone who would heartlessly murder 4 people he doesn't even know. And so they could argue that that can't jive in a normal person's mind, and therefore he is insane. I'm not wanting to like give him defenses, but you know, that's
Hitler was a vegetarian, so
there you go. Doesn't
you know, and once again, I don't understand the insanity thing, but if you're insane, you can't form the intent to commit premeditated murder, so therefore you're not guilty. Maybe they don't call it not guilty by reason of insanity, but it cannot be the case that you can convict an insane person in Idaho of murder and execute them. It just really can't be the case.
Before someone jumps on and it says like we hate vegans, I was a vegan in college. Okay, so like, yes, Brett rolls his eyes at me, but like, yes, I was an absolute. I love. I still eat. Well, you also heard I eat ButcherBox, but so nothing against vegans whatsoever. Nor do I think he's representative of all vegans. Nor do I think necessarily is he vegan. I don't know. I just know what I read in the reports, and it might be part of, like I said, a longer game of what he's playing at.
Maybe he only likes animals.
Maybe he only likes animals. Maybe that's why the dog lived.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I mean, not to keep going back to Hitler, but he loved his German Shepherd and was a champion for non-cruelty to animals. But he murdered like 12 million people and started a world war. So you never know. I mean, people's views are often inconsistent, and this guy appears to be inconsistent.
One real quick note: someone, I think, like 300 comments ago, asked, "How are they going to find a jury of people who have not heard of this case?" I think, unlike maybe some other cases that have been in the news a lot, and we don't need to name them, I think the court system has they knew this was coming. If there was going to be arrest, they knew that they were going to be the jurisdiction for it, and they were ready for it. And they probably issued this gag order that you guys have been reading about in the news to try and combat that. Because yes, a lot of press has been out there already, but maybe they can stem the tide somehow and limit what is out there. And so I think that's part of the court's kind of desire to try and salvage that. You'll still be able to find people. And again, it's not that you've never heard of the case, it's that you haven't made up your mind about the case.
We brought up Delphi a couple times, and the comparison between the two probable cause affidavits has been made a lot. And I just want people to know it doesn't necessarily reflect on the strength of the case. It was evident to me at least, from the press conference, that the position of the Idaho authorities was much more open. They were fine with telling people exactly what was going on. They wanted to share information. There's a gag order now, which isn't that surprising, but there's a gag order now, so that's going to limit their ability to do so. But they were much more sort of out there. They had no problem with this being public. They didn't seek to have it sealed beyond, what state law requires. So the fact that the affidavit is more fulsome reflects that. In Delphi has always been close to the vest. They have always hid information. The fact that the Delphi affidavit is much more limited and in some way, I mean, you could say more appropriate, right? Because it just lays out probable cause. That's all it does. This goes way beyond probable cause. I mean, this is a lot. So I don't want people to assume, because I've seen this, that people are worried now, even more worried about Delphi than they were before, because they see this and they think, man, why doesn't the Delphi affidavit look like this? And look, it's just a different case. This happened in the middle of a town. This happened much later. A lot more video, a lot more evidence. Delphi was in the middle of nowhere. Not going to have any cameras recording much. It's just a different case, and you can't apply. I don't think you can apply the logic sort of cross board.
And also went into the drafting of this affidavit. This was far beyond what they needed to file for probable cause. A judge probably would have signed with just the DNA. Imagine this. It's like a 2-page affidavit. We've seen those, and it would have been perfectly fine to say that I arrived at the murder scene, saw 4 dead people, stab wounds, found a sheath, but not the knife that would have been in the sheath, consistent with the stab wounds that caused the demise of all 4 victims, fingerprint matched DNA. That's all you need. That would have given you a probable cause, way beyond probable cause, for an affidavit. So that could have been a 5-paragraph affidavit. They chose not to do that. sounds like they drafted this. They were ready to move as soon as they had confirmation from the DNA. This clearly had been drafted. They had everything, and they were just waiting for the confirmatory DNA, which they got. And it sounds like they got it, revised the affidavit, and filed for the arrest warrant kind of like within hours, days.
You don't see affidavits like this. I mean, this really is a fulsome affidavit. You shouldn't look at this affidavit and judge all of their affidavits by it. They really did lay it out.
I don't think I've seen one this fulsome.
I know it's so fulsome. And if they have even more information than this, crazy. Somebody asked whether or not his father had any sort of recourse. Number one, his father doesn't have standing because he's not been charged with anything, so he can't challenge anything. Number two, you have no right to privacy in your trash. Once you throw it away, you have given it to the public. So keep that in mind. If you're committing any crimes out there, do not throw away evidence of your crimes in your trash can. That is really bad.
Yeah. Trash can rule. That happens in a lot of cases. Maybe more cases
trash
than you know.
Trash pulls are so, I mean, that is like a huge way to get information.
If you live in a drug house, just so you know, if it's a known drug house, your trash is probably getting pulled on a daily basis.
Yeah, seriously.
Just so you know.
Yeah. And that telephone pole out there with that weird thing, that is a pole camera recording everything you do.
That is not a Ring device. Nor is it an auto light. It is a pole camera that is allowed to be there because it's a public street.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we gave a lot of people a lot of tips on how to commit crimes tonight.
Some crime tips. We try. We have lots of different kinds of listeners, and we're just trying to service you all.
Appeal to all of you, and throwing away your trash in your neighbor's trash is only so effective because that pole camera is probably watching you, and they probably watched you do that, and they probably watch your neighbor's trash. They're allowed to pull their trash too. So,
yes, congratulations.
Congratulations.
Oh, we've been going for an hour and a half. I think we covered just about everything. If you have any questions, now is your time to ask them. Otherwise, I think we're going to sign off for a while. Anything else? Anybody wants to talk? Anything else?
Did the dad know?
Yes. His lawyer will suggest to him to plead guilty. His lawyer will beg him to plead guilty.
Yeah. No. This is strong evidence. And of course, he's trying to get him the best deal, and you're more likely to get a better deal if you plead.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the best legal advice you can give your client is plead guilty.
Yep. Absolutely.
And that's the case we've got here. So,
okay. Before I sign off, I'm just looking real quick. Doesn't matter if your trash is still on your property. You threw it away. It's out there. It's for the taking. I think we're going to get a lot more people burning their trash now, Brett. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you for sticking with us for an hour and a half tonight. I don't know about you, Brett, but I've been watching my phone blow up with my friends who are like taking very unattractive screenshots of us talking like mid-sentence. So I think they're going to use that as, just to make fun of us. So thank you guys for being here. We do this because you guys bring so much energy. You bring so much insight. We love hearing what you have to say. We love your comments and your emails and whatnot. So thank you for joining us. Before we sign off, Brett, do you have anything else to add?
One other thing I'll say, people have asked about him asking if anybody else has been arrested. There is no accomplice in this case. He did this alone. My understanding, and I looked for this to try and find confirmation of this, is that multiple serial killers in the past have asked that same question, including John Wayne Gacy and the Norway mass shooter asked the same question. Did you arrest anybody else? So it makes you wonder if this is like, his weird throwback to his heroes. But no, if he asked that, and it hadn't been confirmed, if he asked it, he was either screwing with the police or, like I said, this was part of his fantasy. He always knew that he was going to say that whenever he got arrested. But no, this is a solo crime. He committed this crime alone, and he has been arrested for it. So.
Well, I think we have some people joining us for the first time tonight. If you are joining us for the first time, we are the Prosecutors, and we have 2 podcasts you can listen to. We have kind of like a long form storytelling episodic show called The Prosecutors. You can find it everywhere you listen to podcasts. We have kind of more hot takes like this one, which is The Prosecutors Legal Briefs, where we talk about nerdy law things, and we try to explain things happening in the true crime world in real time. So we are based on what you see, what you ask us to cover, and we'd love for you to join us on both of those podcasts. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is The Prosecutors Legal Briefs. You can't say that you feel physically attractive after wrestling your children to bed.
Oh, I mean, look, this is a face for radio. This is why we do a podcast.
This is a face for radio.
Brett is feeling so much better, by the way.
I'm glad you sound way better.
There's a sun.
Is that a Faraday shirt?
Uh-huh.
Do you like how I
is a Faraday shirt.
There's a Faraday shirt back here somewhere in my closet.
Also, while we're doing ads, my butcher box arrived today.
Dude,
packed full of meat. So much meat.
Did you get? I got just the beef box, and it was like an entire cow.